The deepest scars aren't on the skin, but on the heart that trusted too much. We bring you the intense narratives of broken promises and the long, cold road to finding justice for oneself. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for these powerful human dramas.
I need you to know what they took from me. Not just the building, not just the business I built with my own hands over 32 years. They took my sense of self. They took the version of me that believed family meant something more than convenience. And they did it with smiles on their faces, standing in my own kitchen while I poured them coffee. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 68 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I am finally free. Let me tell you how I got here. I was 26 when my husband Gerald and I opened the first shop. It was a small alterations and dry cleaning business on Maple Street in Columbus, Ohio. We had $400 saved, a secondhand sewing machine, and a belief that if you showed up every single day and treated people right, something good would grow from it. Gerald was the dreamer. I was the one who kept the books, managed the suppliers, hired the staff, and stayed until 10 o'clock at night making sure every garment was perfect before the morning pickup rush. We had our son, Daniel, in 1984, then our daughter, Patricia, in 1987. Gerald and I raised them above the shop, literally. We lived in the apartment on the second floor while the business took up the ground floor. The children did their homework on the cutting table. They learned to fold and press before they learned long division. This business was not separate from our family. It was the spine of it. By the time Daniel was in his 30s, we had 3 locations. Gerald had passed in 2018, quietly, in his sleep, the way he would have wanted. It was the worst morning of my life, and also somehow the most peaceful, because he was not in pain. He was simply gone. I cried for 6 months and then I went back to work, because that is what Gerald would have told me to do. That is what I told myself he would say. On the mornings when I stood in front of his photograph in the hallway and asked him what to do next. Daniel came into the business full-time after Gerald passed. I welcomed it. I was 63. My knees were beginning to remind me of my age. And I thought I genuinely believed that having my son beside me would feel like having a piece of Gerald back. I gave Daniel the title of Operations Manager. I gave him access to all 3 accounts. I gave him my trust completely, and without reservation, the way only a mother can, the way only a fool does. His wife Renee started coming around the shops not long after. At first it was just visits. She would bring lunch, smile at the staff, ask questions. I thought she was interested. I thought she was trying to learn. I did not yet understand that she was auditing. I want to be fair to Renee, because fairness is something I believe in. She is not a stupid woman. She is actually quite smart. What she is, I came to learn, is ambitious in a direction that does not include me. By the spring of 2023, Daniel had begun making decisions without telling me. Small ones at first, changing a supplier here, adjusting staff schedules there. I would find out from one of the longtime employees, Maria, who had been with us for 19 years, and I would bring it up with Daniel over dinner. Gently, the way I had learned to do with men who do not like to be corrected. He would say he was just trying to help. He would say I needed to rest more. He would say, "Mom, you built something great. Now let us take it to the next level." I did not hear the warning in that sentence. I should have. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday in September. Daniel and Renee came to the house, my house, the same house Gerald and I bought in 1991, the house where I still lived alone since the kids had grown. They sat across from me at the dining room table where we had eaten 1,000 family dinners. Renee had a folder in front of her. I remember staring at that folder and feeling something cold move through me, though I could not yet name why. Daniel said they had been talking. He said they felt the business needed a restructuring to move forward. He said some hard decisions had to be made. And then Renee opened the folder and slid a paper across the table to me. It was a proposal to transfer majority ownership of all 3 locations to Daniel, effective immediately, in exchange for what they called a comfortable retirement package. The package was a monthly payment less than what one of our junior pressers made, and the use of the house for 2 years, after which I would need to make alternative living arrangements. I sat very still. I have learned in 68 years that the moments that want to break you require stillness first. I asked Daniel to explain to me what I was reading. He said, "Mom, you're tired. You've worked your whole life. You deserve to rest." He said it the way people say things they have practiced. I asked him who had prepared this document. Renee said they had worked with a business consultant. She used a tone. I recognized the tone of someone who has already decided the outcome and is only now informing you of it. I asked them to leave my house. I said it quietly. I said it once. Daniel looked surprised. He had not expected that. He had expected tears, or protests, or negotiation. He had not expected the door. They left. I sat at that table for a long time after. The house was very quiet. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something it could not reach, and I understood exactly how that felt. I did not sleep that night. I sat in Gerald's old armchair in the study, and I thought about every decision I had made over 32 years. I thought about the suppliers I had cultivated, the staff I had protected during the 2008 recession by taking no salary for 4 months, the customers who had been coming to us since their children were in diapers, and those same children now brought their own. I thought about the building on Maple Street, which Gerald and I had purchased outright in 2003. I thought about the 2 additional properties we had acquired in 2011 and 2015. And then I thought about Gerald's study and the old fireproof lockbox on the bottom shelf of the closet behind his winter coats. I had not opened it since the year after he died. I had gone through it then, during the estate process, and found the usual documents, insurance policies, the original mortgage papers, the deed to the house. I had filed what needed filing and closed it again and tried not to think about the fact that everything inside it had his handwriting on it. I pulled it out at 2 in the morning. I set it on the desk. I sat for a while before I opened it. There were more documents in there than I remembered. Or perhaps I had not looked carefully enough the first time, because grief makes you skim over things you cannot bear to read slowly. Beneath the house deed and the insurance folders, there was a manila envelope I did not recognize. It was sealed with a strip of tape that had dried and loosened with age. Gerald's handwriting on the front said simply, "For Margaret when you need it." My name is Margaret. My hands were not steady when I opened it. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a letter in Gerald's handwriting, dated March 2017, a full year before he died. The second was a deed. The third was a document I had to read 3 times before I understood what I was holding. I will tell you about the letter first, because it is the part that broke me open and then put me back together in the same night. Gerald wrote that he had known for some time his heart was not reliable. He had not told me the full extent of it because he knew I would worry, and worrying would not fix anything, and he did not want our remaining time together to be spent in fear. He said he was sorry for keeping that from me. He said he had tried to make up for it in the only way he knew how, which was to be practical on my behalf while he still could. He wrote, "You built everything we have, Margaret." I showed up and smiled and shook hands. "But you were the one who kept the lights on. If anything ever happens and the children forget that, I need you to have something that is only yours." The deed was for a property I had forgotten we owned. In 2009, during the recession, a small commercial building 2 blocks from the Maple Street shop had gone into foreclosure. Gerald had purchased it quietly, in my name only, for almost nothing. We had rented it to a series of small tenants over the years. A tax preparer, a hair salon, an insurance office. I had signed the original documents, but Gerald had managed it, and in the fog of grief after he passed, I had let it slip from my active memory. The property management company had continued sending statements to an email account Gerald had set up for business correspondence, an account I had not checked in years. The third document was a letter from that property management company, dated 8 months prior, notifying the owner, me, that the current long-term commercial tenant had exercised their option to purchase the building, per a clause in the original lease agreement. The purchase price, which had been established in the lease, was significantly below current market value, but the option had not been exercised. The deadline was still 3 months away. I sat in that chair until the sun came up. I called my attorney in the morning. Her name is Sandra, and she has handled our business matters for 15 years, and she is one of the sharpest people I have ever known. I told her I needed to come in that day. I told her to clear time. Sandra did not rush me. She read everything. Then she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Margaret, do you understand what you have here?" I said I thought I did, but I wanted her to confirm it. She said the Maple Street building, where the original shop was located, was deeded jointly to Gerald and me, which meant it passed to me entirely upon his death, not to the business entity, and not to Daniel. She said the second and third shop locations were assets of the LLC, which Daniel and I co-owned. But she said the Maple Street property itself, the one with the most foot traffic and the strongest lease history, was mine personally. She said no restructuring proposal, no matter how official looking, could transfer that without my signature. She also said that the document Daniel and Renee had presented me was not legally binding, had not been filed anywhere, and contained several provisions that she described as aggressively favorable to one party. I asked her what my options were. She said, "Margaret, you have more options than they do." I want to tell you that I felt triumphant in that moment. I did not. I felt tired. I felt the particular exhaustion of a woman who has spent decades building something and then discovered she also had to spend energy defending it from the people she loved most. Triumph came later. That morning, I mostly felt sad, but I also felt something shift inside me, something that had been soft-hardened just slightly, not into bitterness. I want to be precise about this, because bitterness and resolve look similar from the outside, but they are entirely different on the inside. Bitterness is closed. What I felt was something opening a clarity I had not had in years. I took 3 weeks. I did not call Daniel. I did not respond to his messages, which started out carefully worded and became, by the second week, more impatient. Renee sent one message that said they were worried about me and hoped I was taking care of myself. I read it and put the phone down. During those 3 weeks, Sandra and I worked. We completed a full legal review of every asset. We contacted the property management company and informed them that the purchase option on the second building would not be exercised by the tenant and that we would be re-entering negotiations for the lease at current market rates. We also established a new sole proprietorship in my name that would serve as the operating entity for the Maple Street location going forward. I also, during those 3 weeks, found myself an apartment, not because I had to. Daniel had no legal claim to the house, and Sandra had made that absolutely clear. I found one because I realized, sitting in that house full of decades of accumulated obligation, that I did not want to live there anymore. I wanted something that was only mine, something with no history in it except the history I chose. I found a condominium on the 14th floor of a building downtown. It had floor-to-ceiling windows and a terrace that looked out over the city. It was more than I needed and exactly what I wanted. I signed the lease on a Wednesday afternoon and stood on that terrace in the early evening and watched the lights come on across Columbus and thought about Gerald and thought about my father, who had worked in a factory for 40 years and always told me that dignity was not given. It was arranged. I called Daniel on a Thursday morning, 5 weeks after he and Renee had sat across from me with that folder. He answered on the second ring. He sounded relieved and then quickly careful, the way people sound when they know they have done something wrong and are hoping you have forgotten. I told him I had reviewed what he and Renee had presented. I told him I had worked with my attorney. I told him I understood now, very clearly, what the assets of the business were and who held them. He started to speak. I let him know, gently but without room for misunderstanding, that I was not finished. I told him that the Maple Street location would be operated going forward under a new structure, with me as sole owner of the property and the operating business. I told him that the second and third locations, as assets of the LLC we co-owned, could continue under his management with a formal operating agreement that Sandra had drafted, specifying his role, his compensation, and his authority, which did not include any unilateral decisions about ownership or capital structure. I told him he could review the agreement and respond within 2 weeks. There was a long silence on the line. He said, "Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this way." I said I knew that. I said I believed he had told himself a story in which what he was doing was practical, maybe even kind, that he was helping me retire, taking a burden off my shoulders. I said I understood how people talk themselves into things. I said I also needed him to understand that what he had presented me was not practical kindness. It was the removal of my livelihood, my independence, and my identity, dressed up in business language. I said that was not something I was willing to accept from my son or from anyone else. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Okay, I want to tell you what happened next, because this is the part that matters most to me, And I think it will matter to you too. Daniel signed the agreement. It took him 10 days and one revision, but he signed it. He has been operating the second and third locations for 8 months now, under the agreed terms, and by all accounts, he is doing it well. We have had dinner twice. It is not the same as before, it cannot be, but it is honest in a way it was not before, and I find that I prefer honesty to comfort. Renee and I have spoken less. I do not hold that against her. She made a calculation, and it did not work out the way she planned. I think she is still deciding how she feels about me. I have decided to give her time. My daughter Patricia called me 2 months after all of this, after Daniel had told her the broad version of events. She called to say she was sorry she had not been more present. She lives in Atlanta, and our relationship had gone quiet in the busy years. The way relationships do when no one tends them, and everyone assumes they will survive on their own. She said she had not known what was happening. I believed her. I told her there was nothing to apologize for, and that I would like to see her soon. She came for a weekend in November. We cooked in my new kitchen, with the city lights behind us through those tall windows, and we talked for a long time about her father. It was the best weekend I had had in years. I am at the Maple Street shop most mornings. I leave by early afternoon now, which is new for me, and which I am learning to do without guilt. Maria is still there. She manages the floor better than I ever did, honestly, and I have told her so. Last month I raised her salary to what it should have been 10 years ago. And she cried. And then I cried. And then we both pretended we had not, and went back to work. The property downtown Gerald's Quiet Gift is now leased to a physical therapy practice at current market rate. The income from it covers my condo, and then some. I no longer draw my entire livelihood from the business, which means I am no longer dependent on the business. Which means I no longer need anyone's permission to step back when I choose. I think about Gerald often, but differently now. I used to think about him with grief, which is just love with nowhere left to go. Now I think about him with something closer to gratitude, because in his quiet, practical way, he saw me more clearly than I saw myself. He knew I would need something that was only mine. He made sure it existed. I do not tell this story to make my son look like a villain, because he is not one. He is a man who made a selfish choice and called it a practical one, and when he was shown clearly what he had done, he chose to course correct. That is more than some people do. I tell this story because I spent 40 years making myself smaller in every room so that others could feel larger. I tell it because I was 68 years old before I stood on a terrace above my own city, and understood that I had always had the right to take up space. I tell it because somewhere there is a woman sitting at a kitchen table being handed a folder full of reasons why she should disappear quietly. And I want her to know that she does not have to. You built it. Whatever it is, you built it. And what you build, no one can simply take.